thank you for coming today. I've only got 15 minutes, so I'll try to keep this story brief. The story today is all about coaching in a data-driven world and using data visualization for effective conversations with teams. The concept of a data-driven world came from a study that PwC did last year. We looked at over 2,000 senior executives across the world, and there were a bunch of questions they were asked, but this one in particular stood out to me. And that was, to what extent is decision-making in your organization data-driven? And the choices were rarely, somewhat, or highly. And the response rate we got back was nearly 40% were highly data-driven, 53% was somewhat data-driven, and 8% were rarely data-driven. That was in 2016. So that's only going to go up over the next few years. And I read this, and I thought to myself, wow, if senior executives are thinking this way, and particularly with transformation initiatives, they're incredibly important to get on side. So how can I incorporate a data-based approach to what I do? The challenge with data is it can be quite boring. So this chart here doesn't really tell you much. It just tells you that volume's going down over time. And it's only once I start to add some visuals to it and start to tell my own story, you can see the impact that working with Agile teams has had on what hair I have left. And then you start to ask yourself questions. That's what good data visualization is about. It's asking better questions. So what happened here? Was it a tough project? What's going to happen in the future? But is there something bigger at play? This was a picture from a conference in, I think, Chicago last month. And if you look at it, it's even got its own hashtag. Maybe I'm part of a bigger system. So what I'm trying to make is that when you use data, you should be using it to ask questions. It shouldn't just give you answers. The challenge we have is that we have our Agile roots, and these are things that we hold dear to us as practitioners. So if you're in the Scrum world, it will be the pillars of empiricism, transparency, inspection, and adaptation. And if you're from a Kanban world, visualize, obviously, very important when it comes to data. But looking at things like limiting WIP, controlling, or looking at your process policies, looking at feedback loops, and improving and evolving. So how do we incorporate that into a data-based approach? So the experiment I've been working with over the past year is something called data-based coaching. And that's using data visualization as a means to have safer conversations, open questions, and facilitating more informed, transparent decision-making, while staying true to the roots of Agile. So we don't just put a velocity chart on the screen and say, this team's rubbish. We use it to drive questions and to have some open and transparent conversations. So now, given it's Agile by example, I'm going to show you a few examples of what I've used over the past year, some of the pitfalls of using data, and something for you to take away if you're inspired or want to read more about it. So the first one is what I call a descriptive visual. And this is a team I worked with from kind of halfway through last year through to the beginning of this year. And it's their work in progress items per week. And it's showing what the maximum and the minimum was on a weekly basis and what the average was. And also what the trend is. So when you look at a visual like this, it doesn't just give you an answer, it gets you asking questions. So, for example, what happened here? Well, if you look at the bottom axis, this was in the build-up to Christmas. So the team had to get something out the door. And WIP shot up because they were trying to get so many things done. And furthermore with this team, that was actually the catalyst for them saying, okay, enough is enough. We're not managing WIP here. We're not working as a team. We're just getting work pushed to us and pushed to us. So if you think about a principle of improving and evolving from the Kanban world, then you look at what is happening. Well, it's great to see that over time, WIP is coming down. So again, a principle there being endorsed by a visual. Then we've got a diagnostic visual. I'm glad the GIF works. I was a bit nervous about this before I started. This chart shows you how long a work item has been in a particular column in days. The color denotes whether it's a story or a defect or a bug, whatever term you guys want to use. And the red line shows you your 30-day trend. So this is great for again, having some conversations around, well, where is the problem? If you look at this example on the left here, we've got a team that has some work items that are nearly 60 days and they haven't been pushed out yet. So that's clearly a problem, that's a bottleneck, that's a queue. So how do we eliminate that queue? Or why is it happening? You know, Ben was talking earlier about feedback loops. We've got a product owner here that's had items with them for nearly 4 days and they're not doing anything with them. So why is that happening? Turns out in this case, they just didn't have access to the board. So it can just be a simple answer. And also, what are the trends? So we've got our 30-day trend here. So we can see if the trend is going up and down. This has actually been used as an alternative to a Scrum of Scrums meeting. I've heard that mentioned a few times this week. Every Scrum of Scrums I've been to has been painful because just people moan about things. This is more focusing on the work, going to the work, looking at the trends, removing the bottlenecks. Then we move to the predictive side of things, and people crave predictability. So this should appeal to hopefully some people in the audience. This will look like a burn-up, and it is a burn-up. But the term kind of we coined for it is it's a landing zone. Because not only are we modeling the throughput rate, and that going at an optimistic or pessimistic rate, you know, the upper or lower range, but also we're modeling the rate at which the backlog is growing. And too often when I see burn-ups, that's not taken into consideration. I've never seen a burn-up yet that's just flat, but every example you see of a burn-up chart is flat. So this is a real example. This is you reliving a project, and it's forecasting the earliest finish range, which is in orange, and the latest finish range, which is in purple. And you can see the rate at which, you know, the team's completing work and also the rate at which work is coming into the backlog. And again, this gets you asking good questions. So what is likely to happen? It's really important for the predictive visual. So where are we likely to land? And what options are there? So it's called a landing zone because your project is an aeroplane. The range is your runway, and the two levers you have to land the plane are scope and throughput. Business controls scope, team controls throughput. So let's have a conversation about how we can, you know, improve those things. Typically in the agile world, you'll have a deadline. It's just the way things are. We can't help it. This chart here is a backlog, but it's visualized slightly differently. And it's using the rate at which the team has been completing work to show the potentially deliverable scope. So the legend on the right-hand side has the columns on the board a work item is. These are all work items clickable into VSTS or Jira. And anything above the probable, you've got about an 85% certainty of getting that by your date. So we can pretty much say we're going to get those. Anything below the possible, less than 50%. So you may as well forget it. Or if you really want them, maybe we need to move the date. The purpose of this visual is to get people concentrating on the marginal scope, the potentially deliverable scope, the middle section. And that's between the probable and the possible. So that's again starting a conversation around, well, what is likely to happen, but also what options are there. So this is one of the emails I sent to someone back in February about a project, and they really wanted that middle section. So they went to the team and said, well, how can we make sure we get that? How can we increase our likelihood of getting that? And they volunteered the subject matter expert to sit with the team for a week in order to get those items done. We did get those items done. That was only through effective visualization and having an open conversation, a transparent one, that we got that, rather than maybe a team overcommitting or work just being pushed to the team. So that's an example of a predictive visual. And then finally, the last visual I want to show you is a prescriptive visual. So that's a bubble chart of how many items someone in a team has. So the bigger bubble, the more items someone has. And the legend on the top is the columns on the board, on the Kanban board, or whatever board you guys use. And again, it asks you, you know, you can use this as an alternative to stand-up, we have. So what should I do? Well, poor John here that's got 10 items, someone in the team come help him out. But also, what is the next best action? So what is the kind of the next best thing for us to do here? Well, let's look at these not assigned items. If they're the closest column to done, let's get them out the door, let's get these shipped. Let's focus on the work and helping each other and thinking like a team. But there are challenges with data, don't get me wrong. You've probably heard of Goodhart's law, and that's when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. There's also the ostrich problem. This is not calling anyone an ostrich, but it's saying that when you present people information, they effectively reject it, and they fail to evaluate the implications of that and what that means. How does this manifest itself in the real world, in the agile world, is, these are direct quotes from people I've worked with over the past year. So working on items, but not moving to in progress because we're looking at WIP. That's an example of a measure becoming a target and then it's affecting the behavior. The ostrich problem, I noticed recently on a project where the scope was ridiculous for the team to achieve in the time they had. And the forecast kind of demonstrated that, but the visual was hidden from the business. They didn't feel confident to present it. And rather using it as an invitation to a conversation, it led to overcommitment, evening working, weekend working, poor code quality, and team just generally not feeling very well. So that's an example of the ostrich problem affecting data. So with that in mind, this is a nice little kind of one-pager I've put together. If you want to go away and you want to try experiment with a data-based approach, it's categorized the different types of visuals, what questions you can ask, and what the specific visuals are. If some of these names don't make sense, feel free to email me or message me on Twitter. I'll happily show you some real examples of using these. But that's just for you to take away. If you want to try experiment with the approach, I'd love to hear your thoughts, if it's worked for you, if it hasn't. And if you've got ideas as to how to make it better, that would be great as well. And yeah, if you want to do some further reading, check out Troy McGuinness. If you haven't heard of him, you need to. He gives away all this stuff for free. He's got a fantastic set of spreadsheets, and he's probably the leader in the industry on this sort of thing. There's a few people. There's someone I've worked with called Basil Arden, who's got some links around database coaching and how it can impact psychological safety or cognitive biases. Dan Vicanti's book is excellent. It's all about actionable agile metrics, but what questions it will get you asking. And then there's the stuff around Goodhart's law and the ostrich problem. And that pretty much wraps up the talk. I haven't seen anyone else mention this on their talk, but if you could give me feedback via the app, that would be great. Even if you did enjoy it, it will help me get better. So yeah, that's it really. It's all about database coaching. Thank you.